I'm Tanya Fox, and you're listening to Fox Talks Business Podcast. I started my career in the corporate world, but always played to my own tune and loved to think outside of the box. This didn't always serve me well with the bosses, so I made the decision to become an entrepreneur. And that little seed of entrepreneurial curiosity continued to grow as I branched out into retail, service, and franchise businesses. Now, I have been fortunate to have amazing successes in the last 2 decades, but they did not come without some really big failures and even bigger lessons learned. And that's why I started this podcast, not just to share the failures, but to show you how you can turn every failure into a success. We're going to hear from some amazing humans from around the world that are going to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the motivational entrepreneurial life has to offer. After all, life is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself, so why not learn from each other? And of course, we're going to have some fun, because as I always say, well, you know what? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode. Hello, Foxy listeners. Welcome to the show today. You know, there's a few things that you guys know from listening to previous episodes about me that I love talking about. But one of the things is my tagline, which is to have fun. And how much more fun can you have when you have a comedian who's coming on to talk about business too? So Merit, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to chat with you more.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here with you.
So give the listeners a little bit of who you are. What is your background?
Well, I've been in sales management, training, coaching, consulting since about 98. I've had my own business. And right around 2014, I took a stand-up comedy class because I wanted to learn how to be a little funnier deliberately in my keynote programs, because I speak at a lot of conferences, sales kickoff meetings and things. And a funny thing happened on the way to, learning stand-up to be funnier for business. I fell in love with stand-up comedy. And oops, sorry. There's nothing funny about your own alarm going off during an interview. But sometimes you just got to roll with it. But it's what I learned through unintentionally was that laughter lightens the load you hold. And, everybody has stresses, right? Especially entrepreneurs and people in sales roles. Like, we all are stressed in our lives. And when I was performing stand-up comedy, it was like everything just melted away for that moment. And I could experience that. I liked the idea of being able to create that in my audiences where they could just relax, laugh. I could see that for the moment that they were, laughing at my jokes, that nothing else was bothering them. And when you have that kind of experience, you're really primed and open to receiving messages that can really help your business, your life. And so all of a sudden I found myself in this position where I realized that laughter lightens the load you hold. And that became one of my keynote messages. And now my program is actually called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Insight. And so I wrote this one-woman comedy show, but people were saying to me afterwards, oh my gosh, that changed my life. I really loved your stories. I could relate to that. And I laughed all the way, but I'm also walking away with some lessons that I think could really help me in my business. And I thought, wow, that was an unintended consequence, but a happy accident. And that really shifted my business and my business philosophies. And so, sure, I still have all the things I can teach you about how to grow sales and all the things, but I think the first thing is to open people's minds to be able to close more deals. And the best way I found to do that is with a little humor.
Well, and I think too that I know through my experience and how the tagline became what it was, is that I realized that for me, when I was telling those stories that people would come back and they'd be like, oh, I totally remember when you spoke, this was the story that you had said. It was always something that they were like, oh, I laughed so hard. And I was like, that's what they're remembering. They're not,
Yes.
I mean, there was a serious message and they got the serious message, but it's like the laughter almost help it stick. And it sort of created that cementing in their mind of going, yeah, I remember this moment.
Yeah. And, we have a saying in the speaking world, no funny, no money. And it's really true because, there's lots of good content, but just because you have something important to say doesn't mean that you have to say it in such a serious way. And I think when you think about the most serious content, that's where I really feel compelled to deliver it in a seriously funny way. And I think when you can deliver serious content seriously funny, it is memorable. People want to repeat it. And when they repeat it, even if they don't get the joke just right, they remembered, they laughed, and the lesson stuck. And I think that's really important for business leaders, for entrepreneurs, for people in roles where we want to be remembered. We want to connect with people. We have solutions to solve their problems. You can't get to the solution solving stage until somebody's mind is open and they're relaxed enough about all the drama going on in their own life that they can just kind of put that to the side for a minute and really hear the value that you have to share.
Well, and I also think too that what this also would do, I would imagine, is also, put them at ease. But like you said, it just helps them to sort of put all of their own stuff aside, and then stuff becomes more manageable, as opposed to sitting. I mean, I've sat through some keynotes that were spectacular, but very serious, almost like a monotone delivery. There was a lot of really good information in there, but the whole time, all I just kept thinking about is, well, I don't do that, or I don't have that resource, or I have to get this, like to-do lists started building in my head. Whereas if I listen to somebody who is funny or who is a storyteller, I'm forgetting everything else. And I'm just sort of, it's like watching a movie. I'm just engulfed in what is happening in front of me right now. I'm not thinking about all of the other stuff.
I couldn't say it better. You nailed it. That's exactly the experience that I create for my audiences. They're in the story.
Let's talk about, because I think this leads to the importance of like also emotional mindset. How do you feel about that? What is your take on that?
Well, there are 3 things that you need to be successful in any role you play. Most of my work is with leaders, entrepreneurs, sales professionals. And those 3 areas are mindset, mechanics, and motion. So if you think about it, mindset is what you think, mechanics is what you say, and motion is what you do. And so when I say mechanics is what you say, think about that as like the mechanics of your skills, right? The skills, the tools you have in your toolbox. That's why I call it mechanics. So for salespeople, it's going to be like your sales process and what are you saying in a sales conversation. For leaders, it's what are you saying in terms of inspiring your team so that they want to follow you. But all the best mechanics in the world and all the best action plans and accountability structures will not make a bit of difference if your mindset is going to sabotage you before you even get started. So there are 3 aspects to a strong mindset. So this is, by the way, where we're going. Serious content may not be funny for the next few moments, but work with me on this. So mindset, I always found it very frustrating to work with clients, whether I was coaching or consulting or training them. And I would say things like, your mindset is so important. You've got to really understand it. And people are like, yeah, like, what does that mean? Like put Post-its, affirmations on my mirror? Like, how do you meditate? Like, what do I need to do to fix my mindset?
Write a gratitude journal, like all
yeah.
those,
Oh yeah, definitely.
all of those
all those things. But that's one aspect of mindset. I believe in all of that. I'm all about positive mental attitude and doing all the things that you need to feed your brain positive messages, see from an optimistic vantage point. That's really relates to one very specific part of your mindset, which is your internal mind. That's what we say to ourselves, right? So that's the beliefs. And I encourage people, do a beliefs inventory. Like, what do you really think about money or the level of decision maker or what you're worth in the marketplace or what's possible? And where did those beliefs come from? Because sometimes we have a belief that got imprinted in us from a very young age. And I need people to see that belief that you decided in many cases as a child or as a young person or new in business, that is no more true than whatever else you would create now to replace it with. Like, there's no evidence that that's the true one any more than this is the true one.
Yeah.
So
Or that they can't change that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So a great example, a simple example would be, I graduated college, I got my first job, right? Like most of us do. And at that time, when I was still used to, quarter draft nights, and my entertainment, budget was pretty low, like it was great, earning 50 grand a year back in that day, those times.
That was a lot of money. I remember
like that was a lot of money. I was like, I'm killing it. Well, fast forward, I got a kid in college. I have much more expensive taste. I drive a much better car. Like that same amount of money would not be killing it in my current world. So I had to shift what I believed was enough money. And until I made that shift, trust me when I tell you, many years went by where I was just making a fraction of what I was really worth in the marketplace, not because I didn't know how to sell, not because I wasn't a good coach or trainer, but because my mindset was keeping me playing a very small game. So that's internal mind. I'll quickly go through behavioral mind, and then I'll answer your question, which that's okay. A long time ago about emotional mind. Behavioral mind is what your actions say to other people. So you've probably come across DISC profiles and things like that. And so many people have at this stage of the game. If you haven't, Google it, DISC. There's lots of free tools out there. But that really is a good study of how your actions move, how you move in the world, right? Like, are you a fast decision maker? Are you a slow decision maker? Are you a people person? Are you a facts and data person, right? So understanding how behaviors and actions create beliefs and how people make decisions about you based on those things. So that's behavioral mind. Emotional mind, I think, is the most fascinating piece of the puzzle. And it's the part where you can really make a big difference once you understand it. So, most people these days have also heard about emotional intelligence. And that's where I think you can learn a lot about yourself that's below the surface. So if you have a gap, let's say you're overly optimistic, but you have a very low sense of reality check, that's an imbalance that's going to show up everywhere in your life. Like someone says, hey, Tanya, can you be in my office in an hour? And you live an hour and a half. You'd be like, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Like, girlfriend, you're not going to be able to do that.
I think my husband might subscribe to that one.
Okay. Well, your husband and I would get along really well. That's how
it's 10 minutes to get anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that also, like somebody says, oh yeah, I think we'd be a great match to work together. And on your way home, you're like, well, I'm spending that commission. They said, we're going to work together, but they didn't sign the contract. So
right.
It's like, you're out of whack. Another example would be empathy and assertiveness. When those are out of balance, and a good example would be, back in the early stages of the pandemic, when it was helpful. You wanted to show empathy for other people. But if you also had a solution to solve a problem that they were dealing with, but you didn't assert that, then that imbalance is not only costing you business, but it's also not serving the person that you could actually be a good solution for. So you have to have those in balance. Like, of course, it's good to be empathetic, but if you're only empathetic without balancing that with a healthy dose of assertiveness, which is not aggressive, but assertive, then that's not serving you. And that's a couple of quick examples of how studying your emotional mind can really help you strengthen those, so that when you layer on those good mechanics of selling or leadership or communications, all the skills you need in your role, they're right there at the top. You don't have to, you're not sort of like digging in the bottom of the purse to find that to use that skill that you learned, because you've done the internal work on your emotional mind.
Well, and do you find that this is a part that often gets left because people think it's like a wishy-washy aspect?
100%. Yeah, you nailed it. Nobody in the course of my 20 plus years coaching, training, consulting, and sales and leadership, nobody has ever come to me and said, I don't need any skills. I've got all the skills I need. What I really need is to, understand what's below the surface. Nobody ever says that. But the reality is the skills that they've learned are going to be more useful for them once they better understand their internal wiring.
Well, I feel that this goes like twofold too, because, just I would say in the last, I don't know, couple of years, maybe, like for me, I've always been a very assertive person, but held that back because, insert any stereotypical, you need to be gentle as a woman, whatever the
Right.
case may be, that goes along with that. And, it wasn't in probably maybe 3 years ago that I was really like, okay, I just really need to understand how I can use this to work for me, because man, it takes a lot of mental strength to try to be somebody else or to soften what I think other people think I need to be softened. But it was hard. Like, it was a tough road to sort of embrace that and be okay with it.
Well, yeah. And, kudos to anybody. Kudos to you for working on that. Like, you got to be, first you have to be aware, right? This isn't brand new information. And then you have to understand how it impacts the different areas where you're trying to do your best work and you're feeling frustrated because it's not always working as well as it could or should. And that's where that deeper level of understanding and having somebody who's got a little bit of skin in the game, but they're a little bit removed. So I'm a big proponent, and you got to find the right coaches, the right, professionals to surround yourself with, because if people, don't understand how emotional mind, as an example, plays into your effectiveness in these different areas, then they don't really have the breadth of how to help you on another level. Most people just feel like, well, and I'm guilty of this, truth is, in the beginning of my coaching career, the only thing I really understood at that time was how to teach skills, so I really just worked on the mechanics part of that 3-part, mindset, mechanics, motion formula. I didn't have the understanding or the depth of expertise at that time when I started to even suggest that it could be something mindset related, or how to fix that, or help somebody fix that. And, so it's like that old adage, when all you have is a hammer, everything needs a nail. How does that go? When everything is a nail, all you have is a hammer. I don't know, but not a handy person. So I don't know the analogy, but, yeah, I think when you have a level of expertise, you've been around the block a few times, your skills are solid, then it's a great time to dive a little deeper and figure out, where are these hidden little blind spots that might be costing me money and I don't even know it.
So what are some of the steps that people can take if they're kind of, in that sort of situation, to sort of maybe even have some flags to go, oh, maybe this is why it isn't working, right? Because I think some people are like, oh, a lot of people go, oh, I'm trying to think of an example even. Well, like, people will come to me and the first thing they'll say is, I just need to make more money. And I'm like, great. That's not going to help you at all. But I'm glad you think that.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes people just get stuck in this like one section, like you said, I just need to build up my skills. If I want to advance, then I just need to have more skills. And then I'm able to offer more. So is there, and this might not be an answerable question in such a vague thing, but is there something that you would be able to go, what, this is kind of an indicator, or even a story of somebody that, that has come to you that you were like, yeah, that's not what your problem is.
Yeah, well, God bless their hearts. I think most people don't really understand what the real issue is. And I think that's where a good, consultative, a conversation, like, you have to be able to ask the right questions to help somebody identify for themselves what the real issues really are. Most of the time, people don't bring you the real issue. They don't bring you the real question. I mean, just a simple example. I even use this in some of my training classes where, I say, well, what's one of the first questions somebody asks you in your business? Could be anything. Let's say we were in a sales role and somebody might say, well, how big is your business? That's not really the question that they want to know. They want to know, are you so big that my little piece of business is going to get lost in the shuffle? Or are you so small that my little piece of business isn't going to be worth it to you? So they're not really asking the question. They're dancing around it. How many years have you been in business? That is not the question. They want to know, do you know what the hell you're doing?
Right.
Can you, do you have the expertise? Will you be around tomorrow? You're going to take my money and disappear, right? So those are the real questions. And I think that, how do I know what's the right piece of the puzzle to work on with someone? I just created my own little, SWOT analysis, so to speak. And it's on my site. Anybody can do it. It's totally free. And it's, sometimes people have those things and it's designed to sell you at the end. I don't do that because my whole motto is I don't want to sell you. I want you to select me. Right. So there's very different. In fact, my training company is called Select Sales Development. We spell it SELLECT, not because we don't know how to spell the word select, but because sales is part of that. But we want you to actually stop selling and start getting selected. So it's a very big difference. So when somebody goes on my site and they do the SWOT analysis, I'm asking very specific questions in those mindset, mechanics, motions category. And as people are answering those questions, it's good for them because if I ask a question like, do you have clearly defined goals for the next 90 days, and somebody says, rates that a 2 on a scale of 1 to 5, 2 being low, then that's good information for them, because what that tells them just by answering the question is, I should probably have clearly defined specific goals. And that's just a silly example. But when I review that with them, so I do two things. A better way, if I was being honest and I wanted to, scale my business and go, like global, would be to have boilerplate responses for the way that you answer those questions. That would be a smoother process for me. I don't do that because I feel like if you're going to take the time to answer these questions, you want somebody else spending the time to give you a very insightful, real, unique, personalized, feedback. And so I personally, or somebody on my team, will go through the responses, and then based on the responses, we'll either create like a little video to say, okay, Tanya, I looked at your responses. There's a couple things that I'd like to point out to you, and here's a couple of resources, and go on your way. Maybe you reach back out to me, maybe you don't. Sometimes I see the responses and I'm like, okay, I just need to talk to this person. I have a few other questions. And so I'll say, hey, I can give you a little video feedback, but if you're open to it, let's jump on a call. There's a couple questions I have. I think I can offer you some better help. And whether or not we end up working together, it doesn't, you're going to get value from that experience. I'm going to learn a little bit something about my target market as well. So there's always something I'm going to learn, and maybe we end up working together. So it's win-win-win, but I think that's a good place to start.
Well, and I think this is really good advice for those people that are listening who, are in, this type of industry, or really any industry where you're dealing with other businesses, is, that fear of like, am I giving too much away? And I deal with this with my clients all the time. Like, you give everything away. I'm like, I don't care. Take it all. Take my whole mindset, because my key demographic, I know, is not a DIY business person.
Right.
It's the person who's like, get it, totally understand it. You walk me through it. I don't want to have to think about it. I just, so I know that, but I love the way you worded it of, it being also a tool that you can use to get to know your target audience, to get to know, am I attracting the right people by, what I have on my site, those people that are answering my questions, Or did I have a wrong view of who actually it is that needs my help? Because for the longest time, I was dealing with like huge, large corporations, and I realized that made me very unhappy. Like, I
Mm,
love the small business. That's where I like shine. That's who's the most open. That's who I get to play around with more. And I'm like, there's just less red tape.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think those are good. Those are good lessons. And, you know, I think one of my core values really is serving others. And so the assessment is a tool that was designed with service in mind. And, you know, sales is a secondary. It's a byproduct, because if I serve you well, it's just, you know, I don't know. I believe in that, right? It's good energy out in the world. Somehow it's going to come back to me, whether it's that person directly or somebody else. It doesn't really matter to me. I just know I'm doing something that's going to provide value to other people. And I think that's an important way of thinking about any business. And, you know, what are you really in it for? And, you know, I have the luxury of being able to think like that. I'm aware because my business is profitable and I've been around for a really long time. It's, you know, it's not everybody that can have a longstanding entrepreneurial venture for more than 20 years. You know, it's not common. And so I know that with that, you know, I'm afforded some luxury of just, like, I'm not worried about where the next dollar is going to come from. I really can have my focus on other people. And I think that's harder at an earlier stage business, right? Because you're starting out, you're like, you know, like, how do money, like, how do I get the money?
Yeah.
Like the person who
Would like
talked
to
to
eat.
you. Yeah. And so I get it. You know, I have empathy for the different business stages. I've certainly been there. And as a long-term business owner, you go through cycles in your business. You go through the gooder. Oh my gosh. You go through good years, you go through, you know, leaner years. And that's just kind of what happens. Even as somebody who, you know, runs a sales business where it's like, I know what I'm doing in sales. I know how to keep things consistent. I teach other people how to do it. But at the same time, there's market fluctuations and there's things that happen in the businesses of my ideal clients that, you know, I'm not in an argument with reality there either. And so, you know, there's always going to be some ebbs and flows to business, and you just have to keep reminding yourself what you're there to do. And, you know, that's why I keep going back to comedy, right? Because I know at some of those more frustrating business points, that's kind of when you need more than anything to take those times to unplug. We feel like we're, you know, we got to push through it with a more effort and more work during those times where it's lean. And I would say if you're drawn to do something like that, that's kind of a clue, you know, relax and listen to a podcast episode, relax your brain, go watch a funny video and come back to it in a moment. Like, get some laughter in your life.
Yeah. So what are ways, you know, because story is such a big thing and obviously humor in stories, but how can people go about, you know, because a lot of the stories come from, you know, life, your own life. So how do you know how to relate those to what it is that you're working with?
Huh. All right. You're gonna make me think about that. Hold on. That's a good one. Um, tell me more. Like, do you mean like how do I pick the stories
Yeah.
to share with people to
Yeah.
help them? Um, I mean, I may be a little bit of a unique animal in that one. Maybe not unique in my speaker colleague circles, but I literally have an inventory of my stories. And as a comedian, one of the things I learned from studying comedy is that humor is everywhere. It's all around you. And the myth is that we just sit down and we write a joke or we write a funny story. It doesn't go like that. How it really happens is you write every day. You write and you write and you write. You observe life, and then you observe why you have observed something. So I think there's humor everywhere. I might be in line waiting for my coffee, and I observe somebody sitting at a table doing something mundane. And then I ask myself, why did I notice that? And it's somewhere in there, usually where the funny part lives. So I'll give you a quick example. I was journaling during my divorce process, which, if there's anybody going through that, my heart goes out to you. It's an evil thing to go through, but comedy really was like the best therapist I've ever had. And so I was writing about all the things that frustrated me in that situation. And I was frustrated in that moment because my ex-husband wasn't following the rules of the documents that we had already signed with the court. And then I observed why I was frustrated with that. And it dawned on me, he didn't do the things he was supposed to do in our marriage. Why did I think he was going to do the things he was supposed to do in our divorce? Like, what's wrong with me that I thought that? And so that's where the funny part lived was, and so now I have this joke, and oftentimes I start my stand-up set, I use it in my keynote sometimes. It's like, I should tell you something about me. I have optimistic personality disorder. The good news is I'm upbeat all the time. The bad news is, oh, who am I kidding? There's no bad news. Right? So I didn't sit down and write that joke. I sat down, I wrote something frustrating, and then I observed why I was frustrated and what was interesting and funny about that. Coaching set a message for them, or on a keynote stage, I'm really looking for what's the message they need first. And then what's the story? Because I've cataloged, I have spreadsheets full of stories, and some of them are 20 seconds and some of them are 5 minutes. But, I've done some background work to organize. Okay, well, I actually was working on it, so it's on my other screen. Hold on, I'll give you an example. Like, okay, the who chiseled that over the door, that's sort of the label of the story. That's good for leadership, sales, innovation, motivation, change, communication. All right. The be an anchored optimist story. Oh, all right. That's good for leadership, sales, innovation, emotional intelligence. So sometimes, you need to think a little bit through, do a little bit of preparation to find the humorous antidote for the lesson and the message you want to teach.
Well, and what I did recently was I asked, the clients that I've had for a while to tell me, like, something funny I've said to them. And half the stuff, I wouldn't even say half, more than half, 95% of the stuff, I was like, I don't remember saying this at all. It totally sounds like me, like something that would come out of my mouth. And the one I always will remember the most is I had a client that said she was really worried about being considering herself a professional because she was just starting out. So she was like, I don't feel like I can call myself a professional because, like, I'm kind of new. Like, she'd been in the business world for a long time, but she was new in this particular role. And I guess I said to her, like, well, all a professional is somebody who gets paid for their work. So, like, a prostitute is a professional. So why aren't you a professional? And she was like, I will never forget that. Anytime I doubted what I was asking for or what I was going for, I would literally stand in the room. I'd be like, a prostitute is a professional. I can do this. It's just like, I'm glad you took more out of that story than that, that little statement. But I thought, how funny is it that sometimes we forget to ask people, because we, quite often will say these things in just talking or having a conversation that has such an impact that you were like, I had no idea that silly little statement made such an impact on you, or, because sometimes it is just the little things that we say that have the biggest impact.
I love that. And I love that you went back to your clients to ask them those things. And then you capture them. So I would just capture that, whether it's a file on your phone, you're just kind of reminding yourself, but especially, for anybody that's sort of in a downturn, always go back, reach out to people who you did go and do some good work for, and have them remind you of the value that you have, and what you meant and what that story meant to them and how that's changed things for them. So I think that's great. I love that. Prostitute as a professional. I love that.
I was like, I'm going to have to put it on a t-shirt for her and just send it to her.
Maybe not a t-shirt, maybe
A
something.
sleep shirt maybe, or something.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, like a
something
silk,
that she's
a
not
silk
wearing
nightie.
out. But it was, it was a really big lesson, I think for me in sort of doing that exercise. And it was actually my coach who's like, hey, I want you to reach out and, here's the question that you want to ask. And I was really surprised because the stories that, that I had told, or one of the ones that were in my Rolodex that I felt were the most meaningful, weren't the ones that stuck. They were getting the message, but they got the message from something else. And again, like I said at the beginning of this episode, was one of the reasons I connected with you. It was quite often a humorous story that I told were the ones that they remembered. So I was like, I guess I just have to keep being funny.
Yeah, that's such a great insight. And I think about that, and for the keynotes, big conferences where I speak, and I know, in fact, I had somebody come up after me, that doesn't sound right. They came up to me. We had run into each other at a meeting in Denver, in Colorado, where I live now. And at the end of the program that I led, this guy says to me, "Did you used to live in Chicago?" And I go, "Yeah." Like, that was so random. It wasn't in the program. It wasn't anything that I talked about. Like, I don't think it was on any of my materials on my website. Like, I go, "How did you know that?" And he goes, "I was in a program that you did in Chicago. I remembered the story you told about your dad and, who chiseled that over the door," which is a sticky little story that basically the message there is, somebody tells you something is impossible, then you have to ask yourself or them, like, who chiseled that over the door, which was something that my dad told me growing up. Like, anytime I told my dad something wasn't possible, he would say, "Well, who chiseled that over the door?" Which I think was, somehow those dadisms. Like, I think he meant like, who carved that in stone, but it came out weird and then it stuck. And so he remembered that one little soundbite, and for 15 years. Like, I haven't lived in Chicago for 15 years. So it was interesting to me because, it's those things that are just a little out of the ordinary. And that story, when I tell it in a program, is funny. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that. You want to stand out as an entrepreneur. You want to stand out in the sea of sameness with your prospects, with your clients. You got to be a little funny. You got to focus on that. And I think, when I say to people, laughter lightens the load you hold, there's so many lessons in that. It's not just about reducing stress. It lightens the load, like, in terms of the burden you have to be memorable, the burden you have to connect. Laughter is doing all of that in the background for you. It's just helping to lift you up and to make you that much more valuable to anybody that you're talking to. That's what we remember. That's what we share.
Well, and I think too, that's what helps you kind of get out of bad moments. I remember my son being young and him like taking a really bad tumble. And of course I was like, oh my God, like running to him. And my husband is like on a knee laughing really hard. And I mean, I did not, but like, I mean, he loves fail videos, but I was like, I am not seeing the humor in this. And I mean, he had a little cut on his knee and, was kind of bleeding. And I was like, I was getting angry because our tiny child has damaged himself and you're laughing at him. But what I realized was within probably 30 seconds, my son was laughing.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, something that was a really horrible situation became something that was like doable and something that was overcome, something that could be overcame very easily. And, it's those little moments that I was like, gosh, I have to find the humor, because I thought, if I'm in a bad place, I don't want the person that's going to sit and cry with me and as I fall. I do want the person who's going to laugh and be like, don't take yourself too seriously, like, let's dust ourselves off, whatever. Yeah. Grab a margarita, let's move on.
Exactly. That's such a great example. I love that so much because kids are there. Sometimes they don't quite know the reaction until the adults around them show all this panic. And then they're like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to be panicked. So kudos to your husband for choosing the laughter. And that probably just snapped your son right into like, oh, okay, this is going to be fine. And as a result, it was probably fine and probably calmed you down after you were done being angry at your husband, probably. But, that's, why do we forget that as adults? Like, that's a great reminder, and one that I am freely going to steal.
Absolutely.
Like,
well, and I think too often, when and I always say this to people, when you find yourself getting too serious or too stuck in things, that's usually when you do really get stuck, because it's hard to think of new things. It's hard to, I will, if we're stuck in trying to come up, with the team of trying to come up with new ideas and we're beating our head against the wall, usually what happens is somebody in the room, and it's usually me, will be like, give me the dumbest ideas you can think of. Like, the stupidest thing we could do in our business right now. They get super, super hilarious, and they're absolutely ridiculous. They're like, we just did this last week, and someone's like, oh, I know, we should email Elon Musk and ask him to come and make moving wallpaper so we can constantly change the look of the room and then we won't feel so stuck in. I'm like, good, give me another one. Like, we just kept going and we were laughing about it. But the funny thing is that those moments of just taking ourselves out of the seriousness led to some really good ideas. And some of those ideas, were bits and pieces of these other ones that were absolutely ridiculous, where we're like, oh, wait, hang on a second. That's really silly, but we might be able to do something with this, and it took it to a different mood. It wasn't so, all encompassing.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe he'll listen to this and he'll be like, moving wallpaper. So if that comes around, that was me. So talk to us a little bit about what you have coming up, who it is that you like to work with. Because I know that there's, people that are out there listening right now who are just feeling vibed with you, Merit, and are like, I need more laughter in my life. So.
Well, I appreciate that. So I would say I did mention that SWOT analysis, and I think that's a great place to start. So that's on my website, a special page for my podcast interviews. So it's Merit Kahn meritcahn.com/podcast.
Okay.
So MERITKAHN. I'm sure you can put that in the show notes or something.
Yes, I will.
And that'll take you to a page where I've got some resources for podcast folks. And I would, definitely start with the SWOT analysis. If you're in that entrepreneurial, you're a business owner, you're in sales, you just I don't even know where to start. That's a great place to start. It's totally free. I would definitely do that. If you're listening and you are hosting an event, you've got a sales kickoff meeting or a conference, and you've got a very mixed audience, there's leaders, there's sales, there's people in different roles, or there's a lot of change coming up in your industry or something like that, whether it's a corporation or an association, that's a great way to connect with me. And there's always a let's talk button on my website. So let's talk about your event and how I can help. And that's a great thing. What else? I would just say, we talked a little bit about emotional intelligence. So if that sparked you and you're intrigued by your own emotional intelligence, you can reach out to me on the website. Also, that let's talk button will get you some time on my calendar and talk about what the blind spots might be and how to fix them. So those would be some great ways. And then the other thing is just get on the list, like put your name and email on the stay in touch with me list somewhere on my website. And then if I'm doing a comedy show in your neck of the woods, we'll let you know. And if you got a 200 seat theater near you and you want to bring my comedy show to you, that's a good reason to reach out to.
Where are you playing next for the comedy show? Do you have any upcoming dates?
Yeah, I'm going to do the show in Denver, July 28th and August 24th, 2023. And I'll probably do the show in the fall, somewhere in the Chicago area, and possibly, I think I'm looking at November dates for New York, like White Plains, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. Well, we'll have to make sure that we link to those so people can find you and be able to attend those as well. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for this. I think talking about emotional mindset, but also with not being shy to have laughter and comedy in business, and that there is a place for it, is a very important subject. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed every minute of it.
What an absolute delight to laugh and learn from Merit. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I hope that you had a lot of takeaways. Some of my key ones were, of course, her open for business framework, mindset, mechanics, and motion. Thinking about what you think, what you say, and what you do. Are they lining up together? I also love the statement she said her father used to always make: when you're doubting yourself, or when you're thinking, who am I? Who chiseled that over the door? I love that saying, because it's true. Nothing is set in stone. You get to rewrite as many times as you want. And of course, Merit's line of laughter lightens the load. It's why my tagline is what it is, and that's why it connected me. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Head to our website at foxtalksbusiness.com. You will see this episode and all of the ways that you can connect with her, learn more about her, discover her podcast, and get your own SWOT analysis to see kind of where you are and some of the changes that you can make. So thank you very much to her for offering that to us. And on our front, we have some really exciting news. If you guys stay tuned, last week, at the end of the week, I got in 4 cover copies. So I put them out on my social media and I asked for your guys' opinion of which one you liked the most. And number 3 was the winner. So you can head over and see what that looks like. The cover of the book has been sent back to the publishers. I'm really excited. We are on track for that to come out. If this is your first time hearing about it, I wrote my very first book called How to Collaborate. It's a small business guide to increase profits, build relationships, and stop doing it all by yourself. And I'm really excited about this. It, was many years in the works, but 2 years in the writing, and I can't wait. It's hopefully going to be releasing in October. So stay tuned. We'll let you know what's going on with all of that. And remember my tagline. Hopefully this sticks with you always. Say it with me if you remember it. No matter what it is that you're doing today, make sure that you take time to have fun. Because as I always say, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?